Hi, and welcome back for the continuation, or if you've just joined us, of how I go about painting a watercolor, all the steps I take when I'm doing a dedicated, fairly complex watercolor piece. And this is the piece I'm working on here, and it is a photograph I took of a river and springs in Central Florida, and what attracted me was this splotch of light here, and also, pardon my finger, light there, and these lighter values here. And I just put water on my photograph, so I don't recommend doing that because that will affect how it looks. But what I do after I do my sketches and my value sketches, I do color studies, and it looks like there's a lot of, I want to keep the lighting diffused. I don't want it a bright blue sky. I want it a real subdued sky. And I think I'm going to stick with greens and some blues and some yellow ochre, burnt sienna, but not a bright sunny blue Florida day. So first of all, whenever you paint watercolor, always remember to wet your paper. So I'm just going to play right now. I'm going to take some burnt sienna. I'm sorry, it's early in the morning. Some sap green. And I'm going to throw in some yellow ochre. And I really should be using more pigment in this. I like to mix on the paper. I don't always mix my colors on my pan. That to me seems like a nice lighter color. I like this yellow ochre for these lighter passages here and there. It's a start. Okay, then we're going to use a lot of sap green on this one. I really prefer using sap green. I will mix my blues and my yellows to get greens, but I like using sap green as a base, especially for something like this. I'm going to take some sap green on moistened watercolor paper, and I think this is a number 6 brush. The numbers tend to wear off on some of these when you use them, and you can see the paints coming off too. I'm going to take sap green and I'm going to mix it in. Ooh, that's intense, but look at that nice dark with some ultramarine blue. And these are, I happen to be using, this is not paid sponsorship, I happen to be using Holbein Watercolors. I have for years. There are other brands that I use, but I really prefer them. And I'm just dragging and fading this paint out to see how this mix will look. Now, I'm not using the paper that I would have used or will be using to paint. I'm just using a less expensive but higher quality watercolor paper. I'm using Strathmore watercolor paper. If you want to be precise, always use the paper you're going to do your final piece on for your color studies. After 30 years, I have a feeling of how my colors will work, so I'm not too concerned about using the same kind of paper. But if you are just learning or particular, always use the same kind of paper for your watercolor studies. That's a nice dark. I can do a lot with that. And then we want to get in some medium or some variations. That's a sap green and aureolin. I want to say Aurelian, but it's not correct. Aureolin is a nice warm yellow without having the intensity of, say, a cadmium yellow. I use that a lot. And notice I'm just mixing it on paper. And let's see, we need some burnt sienna in here. My go-to for darks is a burnt sienna, and I need to wet this paper a bit more, is a burnt sienna, like this. And this can also be mixed on the palette with an ultramarine blue. That gives you a dark brown. I can take it even darker. Excuse me, a little bit of a cough there. And we could make a black allergies. Am I going to do a sky? I will probably do a very gray sky. And for that, I will mix a gray on my palette. A bluish gray. I need a little bit more blue. Maybe a little bit more. You can barely see that, I know. But I don't want this to be real high key. I want it to be a little bit more subdued. And that looks like a nice subdued gray. And when I'm doing the water, a lot of this is reflection, so I'm not going to have a whole lot of water to work with. I may just use the same gray that I'm using for the sky and add a little bit more blue to it. And you can see I dragged my brush there. I'm going to be doing a lot of that because of the ripples of the water. The thing about watercolor is you always want to keep the white of the paper and use that white for highlights. And you can see by dragging this brush, I hope you can see it, you're going to get ripples, you're going to get highlights of the water. It's a very basic composition. I'm almost wishing that I want to put some red somewhere, but then I feel like I'm using too many colors. I like to stick with a real basic palette like this one. So what I'm going to do, and it'll change, and you'll see when we paint, I'm going to make notes as to what I used, which is a sap green, and then let's see, I think it's a raw umber actually. I'm bad. I look at colors, I can't remember names. And then there's a sap green here, plus ultramarine. And then we have a sap green, plus Aurelian. And these two are burnt sienna, plus ultramarine, and that's ultramarine blue, as is this and this. Now, when you're painting and you need to emphasize more things as the paint dries, you can do dry brush washes. This is very dry, and I apologize. You can do a wet on wet wash and see if we have any wet here. You'll get blossoms. I don't mind blossoms, especially if I'm doing something with water. So this is basically what I do a rough color study, and things will change. And that's what I like about art. It's not written in stone, it's not a formula, it's not a spreadsheet. It's something that's organic, that will happen as you paint, as you go along, and sometimes the inspiration comes from where you would least expect it. So that's what I have. Very limited palette: sap green, ultramarine blue, aureolin, burnt sienna, and then that's it for now, and the white of the paper. So thanks for watching. I hope this helped you, and remember, above all, keep practicing. Thanks a lot.